this and the content. So this topic we're about to talk about is one of those ones that it brings into reality what we do. The young ladies will talk about the cyber events associated with the Ukraine war. As you can imagine, as a state, we saw our fair share of those events. We had to make some tough decisions, and we apologize to our family members that live in some of those countries. We just blocked the entire ranges. We just got tired of playing whack-a-mole. We're like, everything, just block it all. So those are some of the tough decisions you have to make when volume is just so much that you can't triage. You can't just analyze what is legitimate, what is not legitimate. You have to respond. And it was important for them to disrupt us just as much as they were disrupting the capabilities of the Ukrainian government while they were launching their physical military attack. So this is such a wonderful content. You will get to hear from two members of the Cyber Scholar program in the University of Delaware, Shreeya Parekh, and she'll get a chance to talk a little bit. She's studying computer science with a focus in cybersecurity and as well as political science. Wow, so she sees the political aspect of all that we're talking about. And she will also have Victoria that's also going to talk. She's a major in finance and accounting, also minoring in cybersecurity. So please join us to hear about these incredible events that happened and how the world responded to them. Thank you. Oh, Mr. Day showed up. Hi, Mr. Day, please. The clicker, it's right there on the table.
Thank you.
Yes, have a wonderful session.
Okay. Wow, I feel so important. I got a mic now. But just thank you for the introduction. Just to say, I'm Shreeya. I'm a junior at the University of Delaware.
I'm Victoria. I am a senior at the University of Delaware. And as you may know, there is a war going on. I really hope you do, otherwise you don't belong in cybersecurity. So we're here today to talk to you about the early attacks that occurred in that war.
And yeah, just to give a brief overview, we're going to be focusing on some of the prominent attacks between January, February, and March. So that is pretty much before the physical invasion, during the physical invasion, and a month after the physical invasion. We're also going to be looking at some foreign attacks, so not necessarily Russian aligned attacks against Ukraine, but also Russian-aligned attacks against Ukrainian allies and supporters. And we're all just going to compile that into a big picture, draw some trends that we've noticed consistently from these attacks, and then provide a call to action for your institutions.
All right, so we want to begin by showing you how many attacks we're getting. So we start our timeline off in December of 2021, several months before the war actually begins, and we go to March 2022, where we have the full month we're in the war. And this is just to give you an idea of how the number of cyber attacks that we are seeing against Ukraine has increased month by month.
Mm-hmm. And now we also wanted to just highlight the different types of industries that have been mostly impacted by these Russian-aligned attacks. So it's no brainer that the national government of Ukraine has been mostly affected because, let's be real. But it's also important to see how IT services and energy are the next two biggest and more specific industries that have been attacked. So keep that in mind for these future attacks that we're going to mention and which type of sectors that are being affected. It's also important to know within that other category there, the second one from national government, the financial sector fits in there too. So we're seeing a lot of the main sectors and industries being critically affected by these Russian-aligned attacks.
Okay, so here we just want to tell you what to focus on throughout the presentation. We're going to have some major cyber actors that we're going to see being responsible for multiple attacks, and these specific cyber actors are tied to the Russian government. So we have here for you, we're going to hear about Sandware tied to the GRU, we're going to hear about Gamma Raiden tied to the FSB, and we're going to hear about Invisible, who is a cyber crime group that has been linked to Gamma Raiden.
Mm-hmm. Now let's get away from the cybersecurity stuff for a second and let's set the scene of what's happening politically, because I promise you that's going to be important. So December 17th, a couple months before the physical invasion of Ukraine, Russia is actually laying out demands for a sweeping new security deal with NATO. But spoiler alert, those talks are unsuccessful literally a month or so afterwards. So now what you're seeing tension between Russia and Ukraine, obviously, but also the United States, the EU, UK, and just NATO in general. So you're just seeing that increase in tension and political pressure now in this stage of the war.
All right, so here we want to frame for you the cyber attacks for the month of January. We just have a brief timeline. If you'll think back to the slide we showed a couple slides ago, we showed you the actual number of attacks. This is much smaller. These are just the ones we're going to highlight for you. And we're going to just go into specific detail on 2 of these.
So let's dive right in. So the first one we have here is Whispergate, which was detected the night of January 13th, but it also went on to the 14th as well. It was attributed to this group Dev 0586, which just means it's an anonymous group that doesn't have a direct linkage to the Russian government. And Whispergate is a pseudo-ransomware and a wiper, which basically, as the name suggests, a ransomware where it encrypts the files and it requires you to pay some money so you can get your files back. But the reason why it's called a pseudo-ransomware and a wiper is because once you pay, you don't get those files back. They're gone forever. So it critically hits Ukraine's cyber infrastructure because a lot of data is wiped out. This coincided with an attack with 70 Ukrainian websites, so you may see maybe some intent with these attacks here, how they're trying to just cause chaos and pretty much fear. And it's also important to note the historical trends as well. This attack calls back to the NotPetya attack in 2017, which is also a Russian-aligned attack against Ukraine, where this was more of a worm. NotPetya was a worm that just spread through Ukrainian systems, but it was also a wiper. So you're seeing these Russian-aligned attacks using similar material from previous attacks here. But the thing about NotPetya was it was actually attributed to Sandworm, which we mentioned before is affiliated with the GRU.
All right, so now we're going to move on a day later where we have website defacements. So this has been pseudo-attributed to, there's a connection between it and Whispergate. However, it's not a hard and fast connection. We're still iffy on how closely they were tied. But the website defacements were malicious messages threatening the Ukrainian people that were posted on Ukrainian websites in Russian, Ukrainian, and Polish. And these are just general fear-mongering messages with the general intent believed to be to scare the people. The websites that they affected were taken down very quickly, and the messages removed, websites were put back up. So you have minimal effect aside from that fear-mongering.
Oh my God, that must be so scary. Imagine going to a site and all of a sudden it's just like, you will be killed, written all over it. But that also has a lot of political implications as well. So this is where the political headlines and the cyber attacks are coming into play here. So as you see with the timelines at the top with the political military events and the cyber attacks at the bottom, at the beginning here we're seeing the intensive diplomatic talks, and then at the bottom here we're seeing how that actually coincides and fits perfectly in the timeline with Whispergate and the website defacements. So for the first time what we're seeing here is cyber attacks used in such a extensive method to supplement and even like promote Russian political intentions and strengthen Russian political and military actions as well here. So with the Whispergate and the website defacements that we mentioned earlier, again causing chaos and also fear-mongering amongst the people, it's coinciding with that increase in tension that we're seeing before the actual war begins.
All right, so as we move into February, again, we want to frame things politically for you before we jump into the cyber. So we mentioned previously that Russia and other countries are in talks to try and get Russia to de-escalate. Now we see on February 17th, it is announced that Russia says there's no way they're invading. They said these claims are completely baseless, throwing their hands up saying you guys are being crazy. A couple days later, they invade Ukraine. February 24th. Should probably know that one too. So again, we have a timeline for you to frame the cyber attacks. Now, what I want you to draw from this picture is that there's a lot more attacks than there were in January. See, huge number increase. But that major increase is around February 24th. That's where the largest concentration of attacks occur.
Mm-hmm. So now let's jump into some of these attacks in February. The first one that we mentioned here is February 23rd, which was a day before the physical invasion, and it is called Hermetic Viper, also known as Foxblade. Now, while it was detected on the 23rd, a lot of official reports say that Hermetic Viper was actually in Ukrainian systems probably much prior to that. In fact, some say that it may be in Ukrainian systems in as early as December. That plus the fact that the nature of Hermetic Viper, it was created to attack specific industries, not just an all-out spread or an all-out attack. It was meant to target, for example, the government, the IT, the energy sector. Both of those combined show that there's clear intention for these attacks. These attacks were planned. They were put in the system before, and they were meant to attack certain groups or certain industries. That intention has been attributed to Gamma Ridden, which is affiliated with the FSB, and this attack actually caused to affect 300 systems across multiple sectors here. And because it affected multiple industries, we noticed that there were spillover effects. So obviously, while the main target was Ukraine, we've noticed like neighboring countries starting to feel the wrath of these cyber attacks, even though they may not be directly involved or have any interest in the conflict in general. And now we move to the physical invasion here with the Viasat attack. So Viasat is a US satellite internet provider, and the specific part of Viasat that was attacked was just a general European sector. Now this attack acted in two parts. There was a malware called Acid Rain that was injected onto these modems to essentially wipe off the files and render them invisible to the overarching system. And there was also a DDoS attack, which basically, again, rendered these modems useless. And the DDoS attack was specifically for modems physically in Ukraine, while the malware attack kind of just spread to modems virtually anywhere within the European sector. And then obviously that caused a lot of European network outages, not just in Ukraine, but all over. For example, this attack caused over 5,000 wind turbines in Germany to shut down for a bit. But going back to Ukraine, it's interesting to note that this attack caused blackouts across geographically the area that's closest to the Russian border. So what we're seeing here is this cyber attack is actually helping make the military attack or the military invasion much easier because it halted communications and caused pretty much confusion and chaos in that specific area near the border. Whoop.
All right. So here we have Isaac Wiper. So if you're keeping track, this is our third wiper. So Isaac Wiper comes on February 24th, or at least the first version of it came. The next day, a reboot of Isaac Wiper is sent out, which suggests to us that the original version didn't complete its tasks. Now, Isaac Wiper was also done by Gamma Ridden, the ones responsible for Hermetic Wiper, but comparatively to Hermetic Wiper, this one was a far more targeted attack, but the code itself was much less sophisticated. Now, this, because it's a wiper, it's going to wipe your systems and remove anything you have on them, causing some operational issues for the networks attacked. Now, this was limited to Ukrainian government networks. However, they have not disclosed exactly which parts of the government were hit by this one, but they were completely different than the Hermetic Wiper ones.
So now let's set the stage again for the month of March. So here what we're seeing March 14th is Russia's asking China for economic assistance as well as military assistance, because now here the resources and the support for the war are kind of a little shaky. So now we're seeing is external or international support coming in for Russia as well as Ukraine, but we'll get to that later. So try to think about those implications for like cyber attacks here when we're seeing Russian allies now getting dragged into the fight. March 29th, there's new satellite images that show entire city blocks destroyed in central Mariupol. And now calling back to that Viasat attack here, we're seeing the cyber attacks have physical implications now. Not everything is just contained to the cyber world. We're seeing physical destruction because of the ease that was caused by these cyber attacks.
You should be expecting this. It's our another timeline. So now for this one, what I want you to notice is that again, we have a lot of attacks, especially compared to January. A little harder to tell, but there is a good bit more than there were in February. But unlike February, where we saw that concentration around the start of the war, for March, we see it pretty spread out. And we'll have about 2 or 3 attacks every couple of days. And probably too far away to see each of the dates, but there's no more than a 2 or 3 day gap between each one. So they're just bombarding Ukraine with cyber attacks while they're also physically bombarding Ukraine.
Guess what? We got another wiper. The Russians just love their wipers, I guess. But March 14th, we see Caddy Wiper here, which is attributed to Sandworm, again affiliated with the GRU. It's a wiper that also exploits just like system access within an organization like Hierarchy, and it renders the machines unbootable. It is less complex and hermetic in the sense that it just attacks any system. It's not targeted towards specific industries. And again, that implies that it's spread through multiple systems. But something similar to hermetic is, while it was again detected March 14th, reports say that it was probably in these systems much earlier, just waiting to be called upon to attack.
All right, so we have 00. This one is also a wiper, but this one gets its name because it uses 2 methods to wipe the systems. One of those methods is to overwrite files with zeros. Now, what I think makes 00 interesting, not very good for the target, but interesting to look at, is that in addition to wiping the systems, it first steals information. It has a hard-coded list in it that tells it what information it wants stolen. It takes that from the computer, then erases all the other files on the computer, shuts down the Windows registries, and makes the computer unbootable. So you're completely done with the computer, and you might not even know which files were stolen. Now, interestingly, you just heard that they've been tampered. You can use the timestamps to see how long it's been in the system. With 00, they tampered with the timestamps, so they deliberately made sure we wouldn't know how long it's been in their system. To us, that suggests that either it's been in there for a very long time and they really don't want us to know how long it's been there, or it's been in there for a short period of time and they don't want us to know at what point that information became relevant to them.
Now this is going to sound a little morbid, but this is the attack I'm most excited about because I spent my entire summer researching spyware. So Load Edge here, March 20th, is a spyware that has been attributed to Invisible, which has an indirect relation to FSB via gamma ridden. And not only did it deploy surveillance software, it works with another software called Tunnel Mole, which just manipulates or exploits DNS protocols. It's persistent through the Windows registry because a lot of the Ukrainian cyber infrastructure is Windows, so it pretty much exploits that. And I mean, it's no shock here, but it is a clear invasion of privacy. There's not a lot of information about Load Edge out there actually, so we don't know exactly what type of information is being harvested and gathered, but we do know that this may also contribute to Russian intelligence during this war. So now here we have our cast of characters again, Gamma Ridden, Sandworm, and Invisible, plus some other prominent ones that we haven't mentioned here. And we're just showing you the concentration of all these attacks. So January, we see a couple attacks, but once we hit February and onwards, we're seeing a variety of different attacks with different objectives as well. So one of the clear ones was destruction with the Vipers, but we're also later on noticing with the 2 most recent attacks that we just mentioned, we're also seeing an espionage intention too with like information gathering.
All right, so we spent a while talking to you about attacks that have hit Ukraine, but we know that Ukraine is not in this alone. A bunch of countries have tried to support them, sending supplies or just denouncing Russia's actions. Now, because these countries have done this, they are suffering as well, and they are being hit with cyber attacks. So we're gonna highlight some of these for you. We're going to start with Canada. It was not on January 1st. It was January 19th. Put the wrong date in there. But so Canada has a group called Global Affairs, government group that's responsible for their international stuff. And they've been putting out information warning everybody that Russia cyber groups are bad. They're keep attacking us. You got to be really careful. And just kind of making sure everybody was on high alert and looking out for Russia in particular. Now, Russia did not like this and hit them with a cyber attack. The cyber attack had pretty limited effects. It took down their website. For the externally facing one was only for a couple hours. They got it fixed and back up, and there was minimal downtime for that. But their internally facing website was down for 6 days. Now, if any of you run a business, you know that if your internal website is down, that's going to be bad. You can't do much work with that gone.
So now we're moving to Germany, and thankfully it was not January 1st because that would be an awful New Year's. It was actually January 28th. But here we're seeing a Russian-aligned attack against a German petrol distributor. Now already with COVID, we're seeing the supply chain kind of trying to recover, and this cyber attack caused even more issues to the supply chain command here. And there's a geopolitical tension here with that. As we know, the EU is kind of reliant on Russia for energy, but they're trying to back away from Russia in the sense of being a little bit more independent on their energy source, especially with this war going on. But Russia doesn't like that. So we're assuming here that this attack also has that geopolitical intention there as well, in the sense that Russia is trying to just infiltrate, or not infiltrate necessarily, but kind of cut down that push for independency in energy here.
All right, so our next attack was February 23rd, and yes, it actually did occur on that date. The dates should be good from now on. But this was an attack against multiple European governments, and it actually originates with a different attack that occurs against the Ukrainian military. So there was a phishing campaign that went out, and they tried to phish the Ukrainian military emails. And at least one of these was successful because they used this phished military email to send out more emails to the European government officials, particularly those that were trying to help Ukrainian refugees. Now this is even before the war started and people are trying to get out, and Russia doesn't like that. So this phishing, it was just a phishing email. They tried to put malware onto these people's computers. So limited effects, but still, they're trying to hurt people that are trying to help people.
Okay, so now here we are at France. So this is actually during an election season here. And what we noticed is not necessarily Russian affiliated, but a Russian supporting hacking group called Killnet has been known to attack some of these French political party websites. Now it's already France during election season. That's already chaotic. Now having these websites down just added more chaos to it. But why would they do that? The reason being is now what we're seeing is retribution for physical aid support. France had recently just given Ukraine aid and sent support to Ukraine here, and that was not liked. So we're seeing an cyber attack of retribution happening to France because of that.
All right, our next attack is again against European government officials and again against the ones that are trying to help Ukrainian refugees. So we have March 6th, this attack occurs, and this was actually not by a typical Russian-based group, it was actually by a China-based group called TA416. And so it's believed based on what they did that they were doing it in support of Russia, or at least Russia's objectives. And now what they did was they first stalked these individuals online and tracked their web activity, profiled the victims, figured out exactly what they were going to do. And then they spoofed a UN email and tried to send it out to these groups with malware called PlugX to try and infect their computers. Now these officials, thinking that it's from the UN, are likely to click on that link, which is why you need to be very careful about the source, because even if it says it's from one person, might not really be that person.
Mm-hmm. And now here we are in Spain, March 14th, so going back to those previous dates, this is around the time of the Caddy Wiper attack. But here a electric giant was attacked, again, Russian affiliated, but we don't know exactly who. In addition to that, there was also a data leak of 3.1 million users. So that really sucks for all those people there. And again, the motivation behind that, we're assuming here it's again for that geopolitical energy reason, where Russians supporting a Russian-aligned attacks are just trying to cut any sort of like movement for like independent energy within the EU.
All right, so our next attack takes us to Poland, March 24th. Poland's Supreme Court suffers a DDoS attack. We're talking pretty limited effects. Their website was down. Seems to be a pretty common trend, but still they're being punished.
Now finally, here we are in home soil, the United States. What we see here, March 29th, is there is a cyber attack on Bradley International Airport. But thankfully, there was no harm reported from this attack. The thing, though, to note is, again, this is an attack of retribution. Killnet has assumed responsibility for this attack, and again, this is during the time U.S. is sending material aid to Ukraine. So now Ukrainian allies who are sending physical aid to the nation is also suffering from those consequences as well.
All right, staying on home soil, the U.S. NGOs and think tanks in the U.S. are facing a phishing attack by a group called Cold River. Now, Cold River is a Russian-based group, but these phishing emails, once they gain access to the user's systems, then tried to extort money for them, but said they were doing it on behalf of Ukraine, even though Cold River is a Russian group. So we have a little false flag operation. They're basically getting money for Russia, but hurting Ukraine's reputation through this process.
Mm-hmm. One day I'll get these clickers right. But here we are with the general analysis that we've noticed. We've noticed a lot of trends of these attacks, and I'm sure you guys have started to hear about them as well. One of the first things we wanted to mention, though, is these cyber attacks are crossing borders. Cyberspace is not defined by sovereignty as of yet, and it's so interconnected that while we have a targeted attack against Ukraine, because of how interconnected the internet is, other nations are actually suffering from this as well. A lot of the bordering nations are, such as even like countries like Estonia, are suffering from these cyber attacks, even though they are not involved or interested in the war in any way, shape, or form. So we're noticing spillover effects now from these cyber actions. It's also important to know that we've mentioned this before, that for the first time, this is unprecedented. We're seeing these cyber attacks at such a wide scale being used to enhance physical military attacks. This is incredibly prominent with that Viasat attack here, where the blackout specifically affected those border regions of Ukraine the most, which allowed Russia to fairly easily invade because, again, it's these communications. One thing about cyber attacks, though, is they have a sense or a veil of anonymity here. While we can always claim or point fingers at who did what, especially due to digital forensics reports and just noticing different signatures and cross-checking them with different prominent cyber groups, it's still very hard to definitely say who did what. So it disrupts attribution blame, which becomes important because then a lot of these groups don't really suffer from the retribution or consequences of their actions here. Lastly, for this part here, it's important to know while we're talking about these abstract topics such as the geopolitical tension or the physical and military attacks, it's also important to note that there are a lot of civilian impacts to people, individual people like you and me. Well, I mean, you look like you can secure your data a little bit better than I do, but we're seeing here is individuals are being affected by these cyber attacks. Any action that's happening in the cyber world is leaking into the physical world here, and we have to note that. We have to note to see how these people are getting targeted and victimed from these cyber military actions here.
So we're seeing consistent threat actors. If you remember, we highlighted a couple for you because we were seeing them so many times. Now, while they're able to disattribute blame, so it's harder to see who they are, there are enough of them that we're seeing consistently being used. They've got these cool, catchy names like Killnet and Gamma Raiden, and they think they're all fancy with that. But it allows us, when we can do it, or when they want to claim that they did it, we can see who's doing it, see who they're acting for, but these consistent threat actors are more experienced. They know what they're doing. They know what works, and they can grow and get better and better. On our side of things, having those consistent threat actors supposedly lets us protect ourselves a little better, because if you know that Gamma Raiden's constantly attacking you and they always use this one trick, you can protect against that. Yeah, they're going to improve and do better, but that's one thing you can help protect yourself against. We're seeing multiple vectors, so they're not using one thing. We're not just seeing phishing. We're seeing phishing combined with malware. We're seeing wipers that are also espionage tools. Having these complex vectors allow them to have a bigger effect, and they're more likely to achieve their goal and hurt you, which means you need to be more on your game because you have to be looking for complex things instead of simple ones. And then we've talked to you about several types of attacks, but the three we're seeing consistently are DDoS attacks, wipers, which we heavily talked about today, and phishing, which is what we're seeing as a major vector for getting into these systems.
So what does that mean for us here in Delaware? We definitely can take whatever is happening between Russia and Ukraine as a moment to just learn and help us strengthen our systems better. And while not so creatively, I call it the 3 Ps here. It's prepare, prevent, and protect. With preparation, it's again noticing the news, seeing the prominent types of cyber attacks that are happening, the different vectors that are being common, as well as the actors who are being involved, so that we can study that and know what exactly to expect when a cyber attack comes. With preventative measures, this is more about like securing your systems here. This is more on the sense of just downloading, for example, a malware detector on your systems, or even running phishing mail-like scenarios here to see who's exactly clicking on these phishing emails in your institution. What better ways you can start detecting those emails so that you don't have that risk of doing that. And then lastly, combining all those, we can protect. We can use those preparation methods, look at the historic trends, as well as see those preventative measures and combine that all here to better strengthen our system. Run simulations, run table talks as well, so you're up to date with all the information so you can better secure your institution here.
All right, so we want to thank our sources where we pulled all this information for you guys. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Those are our emails. We'll be happy to try and answer your questions.
Yep, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was such an excellent talk.
Oh, thank you so much.
For the mic. This was such a critical topic to talk about at this event, and I thank them for joining us. Any questions for our amazing speakers? I will share with you that I'll give you the chance to, you can sit down. Thank you so much. Yeah. Oh, we have a question right here. Lawrence, hi.
What do you think the future is going to hold for the cyber war over there?
Go for it. That's a great question. I think there's so many uncertainties in terms of cyber war, and it's just like the political side of cybersecurity as well, because again, we don't really have any policy defined for like, oh, this is cyber attack is an attack on sovereignty, this is an attack of war. Right now, just a cyber attack is what it is, a cyber attack. It doesn't have that much political implications, but now what we're seeing here is these cyber attacks actually do. They're actually coinciding with political attacks. So I think we need to start as institutions, as a society, and just as a world in general, start to understand and try to nail down some policies and some general terms and rules for what different cyber attacks have and their implications for the political world. So I think once we have that, there's going to be a little bit more clarity. I feel like this war, a lot of this just is a start, and this is, again, unprecedented. So it's really setting the stage for what cyber war can look like in the future, especially with these these attacks with clear intention that have been planned from before, planted into systems before. So that's also something to keep in mind.
I'll also say because we're talking about a war, the types of cyber attacks we're looking for are going to be different, or at least who's being hit. When your city is completely destroyed and you're just trying to survive, you don't really care that one ice cream shop got hit with a cyber attack. You don't care about that small stuff. Now, if your infrastructure gets hit and gets down, that's going to be a problem, and that's where your concern is. So there's a little bit more of a triaging factor that you have to worry about.
I'm over there.
So I forget where I heard it from, but it was on one of the news stations or newspapers. They were saying that instead of reacting to cyber attacks, Ukrainian hackers and government officials are actually offensively attacking Russian agencies. Mm-hmm. Has that been shown to slow down attacks against Ukraine and the surrounding areas, or is that not as effective as they're hoping it
So I don't know necessarily in terms of slowing down. I know what you're referring to, though. There has been a lot. This case here, while we only focus on like Russian attacks towards Ukraine, there have been not only some Ukrainian attacks against Russia. What we're seeing here now is that individuals, like just normal people who just like to hack, are coming into play, and these are called, again, these hacktivists that are having a lot of Ukrainian pride in attacking Russia. And some of these attacks have been incredibly successful, actually, taking down Russian websites and stuff. But I think, again, while I'm not entirely sure about this answer because this is so new and uncertain, I don't think it's slowing down Russian attacks against Ukraine, because I don't think they've reached that impact of critically attacking the infrastructure as these wipers may have done. So there is a lot of uncertainty, and it is a good question to bring out, but even though we're seeing individuals coming into the mix, it's still individuals versus government agencies that have many years of this experience, especially against Ukraine.
Excellent question. To that particular point, there wasn't no successful takedown of any Russian facilities or systems, but it was enough to compel them to start blocking inbound communications from outside Russia. So they did have an impact. They did compel some activity. Thank you all so much. And I don't know if we have any of our FBI partners in the room, any representatives of our FBI or Department of Justice representatives. I will tell you, I had the pleasure of spending about a week with them in Quantico a couple of weeks ago. And what was really interesting was that we always assumed that from an FBI perspective, they were there to investigate, so they're more of after the fact, right? Something happens, they will investigate, they will prosecute and go after the bad guys. But one of the disruptions that they caused against botnets out in the world if those botnets were active, would have been disruptive when the Ukraine war happened. So you can imagine the Russian GRU infecting 500,000 systems across the world, which are actual firewall devices. So these firewall devices are the systems that sit at the edge of your network, right? So it's accessible from the world, and it can be accessed pretty much by anybody. So they compromised a bunch of these firewalls and left them there. They didn't disrupt them, they just embedded their malware on those devices. About 500,000 of them across the world. And it was the first time that the FBI had to work with the Department of Justice and get a court order to allow them to go into people's systems and clean it up for them. So they sent emails, they contacted owners, they did news articles. No, people were not listening. You hear the messages, patch your hardware, patch your hardware, patch your hardware. It's not just because there's a vulnerability, it's because they are seeing something. And people were not taking action. There were about 500, and you can imagine 500,000 firewalls on the internet attacking somebody. It would take any major system down. So they got the court order. They got the court order. They used the authority they have in their legislative code that allows search and seizures. So basically, they seized the malware from those hardware. And that's how they were able to go in and get the malware out and close the hole. But the implications of that during the Ukraine war could have been significant on the companies that were trying to help the Ukraine government recover. So big up to the FBI. They don't usually get their shout outs because we're like, take them down now. They're like, no, we have to investigate. We have to analyze. But this was a time that they actually responded and took down a major adversary for us. So thank you all for sticking with us. This was such an exciting day for us. We say it's our Super Bowl. We spent all year preparing, and we're happy that you're here. We'll definitely make sure we have more space for more people next year, and we'll have better weather. We'll pray for better weather, right? Not another rainstorm affecting us. I want to take the chance to thank the team that put this together, starting with my director right here, Sandra Alexander. Her and her team were instrumental in working all year with multiple partners, internal and external, to put this together. Laurie is here. Jacob from our Small Business Development Center. Joe Hughes. Joe is right there. Maddie Moses. Oh, Maddie's right there. Eric Smith from our JP Morgan family. Burt Reynolds from Sussex County. We also have volunteers from Michelle, Heather, Claudette, Mary, Ethan, Jordan, Nathan, Hayden, and Derek. Did we also have some of the members of our Air Force? Yes, they were also able to participate. So thank them so much for helping us put all of this together, and thank you for staying with us. So now raffle time and presents and gifts. You may show my